What does it take to remain righteous in a world drowning in wickedness? Imagine being born into a time so corrupt that the creator of the universe declares he will wipe out all living creatures, save for a single family. This is the world into which Shem, the eldest son of Noah, entered, a world teetering on the brink of divine judgment. From the moment of his birth, Shem's life was destined to be extraordinary, not because of any wealth or power, but because of the unparalleled task his family was chosen to undertake. Born into a household that stood alone in its faithfulness, Shem was thrust into a narrative of both destruction and redemption, carrying the weight of God's plans for humanity on his shoulders. Shem's early years were spent in a world spiraling into chaos. His father, Noah, was a man of unwavering faith, described in Scripture as righteous and blameless among the people of his time. Noah's household was an anomaly in an era defined by rampant sin, idolatry, and violence. Shem, as Noah's firstborn, was raised with an acute awareness of the stark contrast between his family's obedience to God and the moral decay surrounding them. Alongside his two brothers, Ham and Japheth, Shem grew up hearing the stories of God's creation, the fall of man, and the promise of redemption. These lessons were more than family lore. They were the foundation upon which Shem's character and destiny would be built. The world in which Shem lived was nothing short of a spiritual wasteland. Humanity had turned its back on God, trading righteousness for corruption. The earth was described as being filled with violence, with every inclination of the human heart perpetually bent toward evil. It was a time when morality was not just ignored, but actively scorned, and the ways of God were abandoned in favor of self-indulgence and lawlessness. In such an environment, Shem's family was a beacon of light, a solitary remnant of faith in an otherwise darkened world. Noah's obedience to God set the tone for his household, and Shem, as his eldest son, bore witness to the tension between his family's devotion and the ridicule they endured from their neighbors. As the eldest of Noah's three sons, Shem occupied a position of responsibility and privilege within the family. His brothers, Ham and Japheth, each had their unique roles, but Shem's proximity to Noah positioned him as both a confidant and an apprentice. Together, the three brothers formed a bond that would prove essential in the years to come, as they worked alongside their father to fulfill an unprecedented divine command. Yet within the unity of the family, there were undercurrents of complexity. Ham, whose actions later in life would invite a curse upon his descendants, already displayed signs of impulsiveness, while Japheth often took a more reserved and thoughtful approach. Amid these dynamics, Shem emerged as a steady and faithful presence, embodying the principles Noah instilled in his sons. Shem's early life was undoubtedly shaped by the looming sense of judgment that hung over the pre-flood world. Noah, receiving direct instructions from God, began constructing an ark, a vessel unlike anything the world had ever seen. The enormity of this task was matched only by the ridicule it invited. For years, Shem watched as his father obediently followed God's commands, cutting timber, sealing planks, and shaping a structure that seemed, to the outside world, utterly nonsensical. Yet within the walls of their home, the ark was a symbol of hope and salvation, a tangible representation of God's promise to preserve their family through the coming judgment. Shem's role in the construction of the ark was integral. As Noah's eldest son, he likely took on significant leadership responsibilities, coordinating efforts with his brothers and ensuring that each aspect of the ark was crafted according to God's precise instructions. The physical labor was grueling, requiring strength, endurance, and unwavering faith in a promise that had yet to be fulfilled. But the spiritual labor was equally demanding. Each hammer strike was a declaration of trust in God's word, a defiance of the cynicism and hostility of their neighbors. For Shem, these years of preparation were formative, solidifying his faith and his commitment to the path God had laid before him. The moral decay of the pre-flood world served as a constant backdrop to Shem's early life, shaping his understanding of humanity's need for redemption. He witnessed firsthand the consequences of living apart from God, as communities descended into chaos and violence became the norm. This environment not only reinforced the importance of his family's faith, but also deepened Shem's sense of purpose. He understood that his family's survival was not just about preserving their lives, but about preserving the hope of humanity's restoration. Shem's awareness of this higher calling set him apart, even within his own family, and positioned him as a spiritual leader for the generations to come. Shem's upbringing was marked by contrasts: light and darkness, faith and rebellion, obedience and defiance. These dichotomies framed his worldview and prepared him for the pivotal role he would play in the post-flood world. While his peers pursued lives of hedonism and self-interest, Shem was immersed in a household where God's presence was palpable, his voice guiding their every decision. This environment of faith and discipline not only shaped Shem's character, but also prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. As Shem grew into adulthood, the ark began to take shape, a testament to his family's unwavering obedience and God's meticulous plan. The structure loomed large, both physically and symbolically, as a beacon of salvation in a world hurtling toward destruction. Shem's hands, calloused from years of labor, bore the marks of his commitment to the divine mission. Yet his heart carried a greater burden, the knowledge that the world as he knew it would soon be no more. Friends, acquaintances, and entire communities would be swept away, leaving only Shem's family to carry forward the legacy of humanity. Through Shem's birth and early life, we see the profound impact of growing up in a family chosen by God to fulfill an extraordinary purpose. His formative years were a crucible of faith, shaping him into a man who could withstand the challenges of rebuilding a broken world. In Shem's story, we find a reflection of God's grace and sovereignty, a reminder that even in the darkest times, he raises up individuals to carry his light forward. As the floodwaters loomed on the horizon, Shem stood ready, a faithful servant in a faithless world, prepared to embark on a journey that would redefine the course of history. The ark, towering as a monumental testament to faith and obedience, became the central focus of Shem's life as he worked alongside his father Noah and brothers Ham and Japheth to construct this vessel of salvation. God's command to Noah to build the ark was specific and overwhelming in its scope. A massive wooden structure, 3 stories tall, designed to house every kind of animal and preserve human life during the impending flood. For Shem, the ark was not merely a physical project, but a profound spiritual mission, one that tested the limits of his faith, endurance, and emotional strength. Day after day, year after year, Shem devoted himself to this task, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on their ability to complete it according to God's instructions. Shem's role in the building of the ark was both practical and deeply personal. As the eldest son, he likely assumed a position of leadership within the team, coordinating efforts, delegating tasks, and ensuring that every plank of wood and pitch seal met the exact specifications God had provided. The ark was no simple construction project. It was an extraordinary undertaking requiring skill, precision, and relentless determination. Shem's days were filled with the sounds of tools striking wood, the rhythmic swing of hammers, and the sweat of labor under the sun. Yet, amid the physical toil, there was a spiritual weight that permeated every action. This was not just a vessel for survival, it was an act of obedience, a declaration of trust in God's promise to deliver them through the waters of judgment. The emotional burden of this mission was immense. Shem and his family were surrounded by a world that mocked their efforts and scorned their faith. As the ark took shape, it became a visible reminder of God's impending judgment, a judgment the world refused to acknowledge. Friends and neighbors likely sneered at Shem and his family, ridiculing the absurdity of building a massive boat on dry land in preparation for a flood they had never experienced or believed possible. These taunts, however, did not deter Shem. He understood the gravity of their task and chose to focus on the promise of deliverance rather than the disbelief of others. The ridicule served as a constant reminder of the stark difference between his family's obedience to God and the defiance of the world around them. As the years passed and the ark neared completion, Shem must have grappled with a mixture of emotions: anticipation for the fulfillment of God's promise, sorrow for the impending destruction of humanity, and a deep sense of responsibility for the role he and his family played in God's plan. The ark became a sanctuary of faith, a place where Shem could pour his efforts into something greater than himself, knowing that each beam and nail carried eternal significance. His faithfulness in this task demonstrated not only his obedience, but also his resilience in the face of overwhelming challenges. When the ark was finally completed, God instructed Noah and his family to begin gathering the animals. This moment was a turning point for Shem, as the abstract promise of judgment became a tangible reality. The sight of animals of every kind, pairs of lions, elephants, birds, and creeping creatures making their way toward the ark, was both awe-inspiring and sobering. It was a vivid confirmation that God's words were true, that the flood was imminent, and that the ark would indeed serve as the means of salvation. Shem and his brothers worked tirelessly to prepare the ark for its inhabitants, constructing pens, storing food, and ensuring that every creature had a place within the vessel. The day the rains began was one Shem would never forget. As the family entered the ark and God himself sealed the door behind them, the first drops of rain fell, quickly turning into a deluge. The sound of thunder echoed through the sky, and the waters of the deep burst forth, flooding the earth with a ferocity that defied imagination. Inside the ark, Shem and his family could hear the cries of those outside, desperate and unprepared for the judgment they had scoffed at for so long. This was the moment Shem had known would come, yet no amount of preparation could shield him from the emotional weight of witnessing humanity's destruction. The grief of seeing the world he had known swept away was tempered only by the knowledge that God's justice was being carried out and that his family had been spared to carry forward his purposes. The days and nights within the ark were a mixture of monotony and tension. Shem, along with his brothers and their wives, tended to the animals, ensuring they were fed and cared for during their time aboard. The constant sound of rain against the ark's wooden exterior served as a reminder of the storm raging outside, while the stillness within provided an opportunity for reflection and prayer. Shem likely spent many hours in quiet contemplation, seeking God's presence and strength as he processed the enormity of what was happening. The ark, though a place of refuge, was also a place of transformation, where Shem's faith was refined and his sense of purpose deepened. As the floodwaters began to recede and the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, Shem and his family emerged into a world that was both familiar and unrecognizably new. The landscapes they had known were gone, replaced by a blank canvas upon which God would begin his work of renewal. For Shem, the end of the flood marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one in which he would carry the lessons of the ark and the flood into the task of rebuilding humanity. The ark was more than a vessel, it was a symbol of God's mercy and faithfulness, and Shem's role in its construction and maintenance had been an act of worship, a testament to his unwavering trust in the Creator. The story of Shem and the ark is one of resilience, faith, and obedience in the face of overwhelming odds. It is a reminder that God's plans often require extraordinary commitment and trust, even when they defy human understanding. Shem's dedication to his role in the divine mission not only preserved his family, but also laid the foundation for the generations that would follow. Through the storm and the flood, Shem remained steadfast, holding on to the promise of a future shaped by God's redemption. His actions within the ark were not merely about survival. They were about stewardship, faithfulness, and the hope of a new beginning. When the floodwaters receded and the ark settled on Mount Ararat, Shem and his family stepped out into a world transformed. The landscapes they once knew had been reshaped by the cataclysmic deluge, and the vast emptiness of the earth served as a stark reminder of the judgment they had just witnessed. For Shem, this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with both extraordinary responsibility and profound opportunity. As a member of the only surviving family, Shem was tasked with the monumental duty of helping to repopulate and rebuild a world that had been wiped clean of its wickedness. It was a mission that required resilience, faith, and an unwavering commitment to God's promises. Shem's role in the post-flood world was multifaceted. He was not only a builder and a planter, working to establish homes, fields, and communities, but also a spiritual leader who carried forward the faith and teachings of his father, Noah. The devastation left by the flood was immense, but so too was the hope of a fresh start, a chance to create a society rooted in righteousness rather than corruption. Shem's efforts, alongside those of his brothers Ham and Japheth, were instrumental in laying the foundation for this new beginning. Together they worked to rebuild civilization, planting crops, constructing settlements, and fostering a sense of unity among their descendants. Yet, even as they toiled to restore the earth, the memory of the flood loomed large, a sobering reminder of humanity's capacity for sin and the consequences of turning away from God. Central to Shem's life after the flood was the covenant God established with Noah, a covenant that would shape not only Shem's destiny but also the course of human history. This divine agreement, symbolized by the rainbow, was a promise that God would never again destroy the earth by flood. It was a covenant of mercy and hope, underscoring God's desire to preserve humanity despite its flaws. For Shem, this covenant was deeply personal. He had witnessed firsthand both the judgment of God and the grace that spared his family, and the rainbow became a constant reminder of the faithfulness of the Creator. As Noah's eldest son, Shem carried the weight of this covenant, understanding its implications for the generations to come. The covenant was not just a promise of protection, it was also a call to responsibility. God's instructions to Noah and his sons included a renewed mandate to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. This command echoed the original blessing given to Adam and Eve, signaling a restoration of humanity's purpose. For Shem, this mandate was both a privilege and a burden. He understood that his actions and choices would set the tone for the new world, influencing not only his immediate descendants, but also the trajectory of human history. This awareness shaped Shem's life, driving him to live in a way that honored God and upheld the principles of faith and righteousness. As Shem began to raise his own family, his role as a patriarch took on greater significance. His descendants would become the ancestors of nations, carrying forward the legacy of faith and obedience that had preserved them through the flood. Shem's lineage, in particular, was marked by a unique spiritual calling. Through his line would come the Semitic peoples, including the Hebrews, the Assyrians, and the Arameans. This heritage positioned Shem as a foundational figure in the story of God's covenantal relationship with humanity. His life became a bridge between the pre-flood and post-flood worlds, linking the judgment of the past with the promise of redemption in the future. The covenant also reinforced the importance of stewardship, a principle that guided Shem's actions in the years following the flood. As the earth began to recover, Shem and his family were tasked with caring for the land and its creatures, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. This stewardship extended beyond the physical realm to include the spiritual well-being of humanity. Shem's faithfulness in preserving the knowledge of God and teaching it to his descendants was a crucial aspect of his role in rebuilding the world. In a time when the memory of the flood could have been overshadowed by the demands of survival, Shem's commitment to passing on the stories of God's justice and mercy ensured that the covenant remained central to his family's identity. Despite the enormity of his responsibilities, Shem's life after the flood was not without challenges. The unity that had defined Noah's family during the ark's construction began to fray as new generations were born, and the sons of Noah established their own households. Differences in priorities, values, and leadership styles emerged, creating tensions that would eventually shape the course of history. Yet, through it all, Shem remained steadfast in his commitment to God and to the covenant. His leadership was marked by humility and a deep sense of purpose, qualities that set him apart as a spiritual guide for his family and his descendants. The significance of Shem's role in the post-flood world cannot be overstated. He was more than a survivor. He was a custodian of faith, a builder of nations, and a bearer of God's promises. His life illustrates the profound impact of obedience and trust in God, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. Through Shem's efforts, the earth was not only repopulated, but also renewed with a sense of hope and purpose. His commitment to the covenant ensured that the knowledge of God's justice and mercy would be preserved for future generations, laying the groundwork for the unfolding of God's redemptive plan. Shem's story after the flood serves as a reminder of the transformative power of faith and the importance of living in alignment with God's purposes. In a world that had been given a second chance, Shem's life became a beacon of hope, demonstrating that renewal and restoration are possible through obedience and trust in the Creator. His legacy, rooted in the covenant with Noah, continues to inspire reflection on the ways in which we can participate in God's work of redemption, both in our own lives and in the world around us. The aftermath of the flood brought a renewed sense of purpose for Shem and his family, but it also brought moments of human weakness and tension that would have far-reaching consequences. One of the most significant events in Shem's post-flood life was the incident involving Noah's vineyard, a moment that not only revealed the frailty of even the most righteous individuals, but also reshaped the dynamics among Noah's sons. Noah, a man who had faithfully walked with God and endured the trial of the flood, planted a vineyard as part of the family's effort to cultivate the earth. Over time, the vineyard bore fruit, and Noah made wine from its produce. In an uncharacteristic lapse of judgment, Noah drank to excess and fell into a deep sleep, lying uncovered in his tent. This moment of vulnerability became a catalyst for division within the family. Ham, the father of Canaan, discovered Noah's state and reacted in a way that exposed his lack of respect and reverence for his father. Rather than covering Noah and preserving his dignity, Ham chose to mock and dishonor him, an act that demonstrated a profound disregard for the authority and sanctity of the family unit. In contrast, Shem and Japheth, upon learning of their father's condition, acted with discretion and respect. Together, they took a garment, walked backward into the tent, and covered their father without looking upon his nakedness. This act of humility and honor highlighted the stark difference between Ham's irreverence and Shem's commitment to upholding the principles of respect and righteousness that had been instilled in him. When Noah awoke and learned of what had transpired, his response was both prophetic and decisive. Filled with grief and righteous indignation, Noah pronounced a curse upon Canaan, Ham's son, declaring, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." This curse, though directed at Canaan, was a reflection of Ham's dishonorable actions and served as a warning of the consequences of failing to uphold family and moral values. For Shem and Japheth, however, Noah's response was one of blessing. Turning to Shem, Noah declared, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem." This statement not only affirmed Shem's righteousness, but also established him as the spiritual leader among his brothers. Noah's blessing of Shem carried profound implications, both for Shem's immediate role within the family and for the legacy of his descendants. By associating Shem with the Lord's name, the God of Shem, Noah elevated Shem's spiritual standing and set him apart as the custodian of the covenantal relationship with God. This blessing was not merely about honor. It was a declaration of Shem's role as the patriarch of a lineage through which God's purposes would be fulfilled. Through Shem's descendants would come Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and ultimately the Messiah. Noah's words foreshadowed the unfolding of salvation history, positioning Shem as a pivotal figure in God's redemptive plan. The contrast between Shem's blessing and Ham's curse also highlighted the enduring importance of character and faithfulness. Shem's actions during the incident with Noah demonstrated his deep respect for authority and his commitment to preserving the sanctity of the family. By covering Noah's nakedness, Shem not only protected his father's dignity, but also upheld the moral principles that had been central to their survival through the flood. This act of righteousness was a reflection of Shem's broader role as a spiritual leader, a role that Noah recognized and affirmed through his blessing. The blessing of Shem also underscored the interconnectedness of faith and responsibility. As the recipient of Noah's blessing, Shem was entrusted with the task of carrying forward the knowledge of God and teaching it to his descendants. This responsibility was both a privilege and a burden, requiring Shem to remain steadfast in his faith while guiding future generations in the ways of righteousness. Shem's life became a bridge between the covenant with Noah and the promises that would later be made to Abraham, forming a continuous thread of faithfulness and divine purpose. For Shem, Noah's blessing was not simply a reward for his actions, but a call to greater service. It signified that his life was part of something far larger than himself, a divine narrative that would shape the course of human history. This sense of purpose likely deepened Shem's commitment to his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader. His descendants, including Eber, from whom the term Hebrew is derived, would carry forward the legacy of faith and become the ancestors of nations that played central roles in God's plan. The incident with Noah's vineyard and the subsequent blessing also reveal the complexities of family dynamics and the far-reaching consequences of individual choices. Ham's dishonor set a precedent for strife and division, as the curse upon Canaan became a defining feature of his lineage. In contrast, Shem's honor and righteousness established a foundation of faith and integrity that would guide his descendants. These contrasting legacies serve as a reminder of the impact of our actions, not only on ourselves, but on future generations. Shem's choice to act with humility and respect exemplifies the importance of living in alignment with God's principles, even in moments of tension and difficulty. As Shem continued to live out the blessings spoken over him, his life became a testament to the enduring power of faith and obedience. His role as the spiritual leader among his brothers was not about domination or superiority, but about service and stewardship. Shem's faithfulness in this role ensured that the knowledge of God remained central to his family's identity, even as they expanded and established nations. The blessing of Shem was not an endpoint, but a beginning, a call to live in a way that honored God and reflected his character to the world. The legacy of Shem's blessing reaches far beyond his own lifetime, serving as a foundation for the covenantal promises that would follow. Through his line, the world would come to know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and ultimately the redemption offered through Jesus Christ. Shem's life and the blessing he received remind us that God often works through individuals to shape the course of history, calling them to live faithfully and to carry forward his purposes. The story of Shem and the blessing of Noah challenges us to consider how we can live in a way that honors God and impacts the generations to come. Shem's role in the establishment of nations marked one of the most enduring aspects of his legacy, shaping the cultural, spiritual, and historical landscape of the ancient world. As the father of the Semitic nations, Shem's lineage became the foundation for some of the most influential civilizations in human history, including the Hebrews, Assyrians, Arameans, and Elamites. Through his descendants, Shem played a pivotal role in fulfilling the divine mandate to repopulate the earth after the flood and in carrying forward the knowledge of God's covenant. His life and lineage exemplify the intertwining of faith and history, where spiritual truths were carried forward through the growth of nations and the development of societies. The genealogies, recorded in Genesis, trace the descendants of Shem with remarkable detail, emphasizing their significance in God's unfolding plan for humanity. Among Shem's children were Elam, Assur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram, each of whom became the progenitor of distinct peoples and cultures. From Elam came the Elamites, an ancient civilization in present-day Iran. Assur became the father of the Assyrians, one of the great empires of the ancient Near East. And Aram gave rise to the Arameans, whose language, Aramaic, became widely used throughout the region. The most notable branch of Shem's lineage, however, came through Arphaxad, whose descendants included Eber, from whom the term Hebrew is derived. This line would eventually lead to Abraham, the patriarch of Israel, and ultimately to Jesus Christ, fulfilling the messianic promise. Shem's descendants were instrumental in shaping the spiritual and cultural identity of the post-flood world. The Semitic nations were not only significant in their political and economic contributions, but also in their role as stewards of divine revelation. Through Shem's line, the knowledge of the one true God was preserved and transmitted, even as idolatry and polytheism began to spread among other peoples. This stewardship of faith became a defining characteristic of Shem's descendants, particularly the Hebrews, who carried forward the covenantal relationship with God established through Abraham. Shem's role as the father of these nations underscores the importance of lineage in the biblical narrative, where family and faith are intricately connected in the unfolding of God's plan. The cultural implications of Shem's lineage are profound. The Semitic nations, rooted in Shem's line, became central players in the development of language, law, and religion in the ancient world. Aramaic, a descendant of the language spoken by the Arameans, became a lingua franca in the Near East and was even spoken by Jesus during his earthly ministry. The Hebrews, through their covenant with God, established a legal and moral framework that continues to influence Western thought and ethics to this day. These contributions highlight the enduring impact of Shem's descendants, whose influence extended far beyond their own time to shape the course of human history. The spiritual significance of Shem's role in the nations lies in the preservation and propagation of monotheism. In a world that quickly turned to idolatry after the flood, Shem's lineage stood as a beacon of faith in the one true God. While other nations descended into the worship of false gods, Shem's descendants maintained the traditions and teachings that had been passed down through Noah. This commitment to preserving the knowledge of God ensured that the covenantal promises made to humanity would not be forgotten, even in the face of widespread spiritual decline. Through Shem's line, the prophetic hope of redemption was kept alive, culminating in the coming of the Messiah. The division of nations following the events of the Tower of Babel further highlighted Shem's significance. As the peoples of the earth were scattered and their languages confused, Shem's descendants retained their distinct identity and role as carriers of divine truth. This preservation of identity amidst dispersion underscores the resilience of Shem's lineage and their commitment to their spiritual heritage. While the Tower of Babel represented humanity's attempt to unify under its own power, Shem's descendants exemplified a unity rooted in faith and obedience to God. This contrast between human ambition and divine purpose serves as a recurring theme in the biblical narrative, with Shem's lineage consistently aligned with the latter. The Assyrians, one of the prominent nations descended from Shem, illustrate the complexity of his legacy. As a powerful empire, the Assyrians were known for their military conquests and cultural advancements, but they were also instruments of God's judgment in the prophetic literature. The dual role of Shem's descendants, as both participants in human history and agents in God's plan, reflects the multifaceted nature of their significance. While the Assyrians played a role in the judgment of Israel and Judah, they also serve as a reminder of God's sovereignty in guiding the course of nations. The Hebrews, as direct descendants of Shem through Abraham, embody the spiritual core of his legacy. Through them, the covenantal promises of land, nationhood, and blessing were realized, and the foundations for the messianic hope were established. Shem's role as the father of the Hebrews underscores his unique position in salvation history, where his lineage becomes the vehicle for God's redemptive work. This lineage not only preserved the knowledge of God, but also served as a testimony to his faithfulness, even in the midst of humanity's rebellion and brokenness. Shem's impact on the nations also carries a profound cultural and theological message about the interconnectedness of humanity. As the father of multiple nations, Shem's lineage demonstrates the shared origins of diverse peoples and the unity of God's creation. This unity, however, is balanced by the distinct roles and purposes assigned to each nation within God's plan. The Semitic nations, with their unique contributions to faith, culture, and history, reflect the diversity of God's creation while pointing toward the ultimate unity that will be realized in his redemptive purposes. In Shem's life and lineage, we see a microcosm of the broader biblical narrative. The interplay between human agency and divine purpose, the tension between faithfulness and rebellion, and the hope of restoration through God's promises. Shem's descendants, through their varied roles in history, embody the complexity and richness of this narrative, serving as both participants in and witnesses to God's unfolding plan. Their contributions to language, law, and religion continue to resonate, offering a testament to the enduring impact of Shem's life. Shem's role in the nations invites reflection on our own place within God's story. His life reminds us of the importance of faithfulness in carrying forward the knowledge of God, even in a world marked by spiritual decline. The legacy of Shem and his descendants challenges us to consider how we can contribute to the preservation and propagation of faith in our own time, ensuring that the truth of God's promises is passed on to future generations. Through Shem, we are reminded that each life, no matter how quiet or seemingly ordinary, has the potential to shape the course of history when aligned with God's purposes. Shem's legacy finds its most profound expression in his connection to the lineage of Abraham, the man through whom God would establish a covenant that reverberates throughout history. As the ancestor of Abraham, Shem occupies a unique and pivotal role in the biblical narrative, bridging the covenantal promise made to Noah with the unfolding plan of redemption that would ultimately culminate in the coming of the Messiah. Through his descendants, Shem carried forward the knowledge of God's promises and ensured that the covenant established with Noah did not end with the flood, but instead became the foundation for a new era of divine relationship with humanity. The genealogies in Genesis draw a direct line from Shem to Abraham, emphasizing the importance of this lineage in God's plan. Shem's son Arphaxad fathered generations that led to Eber, from whom the term Hebrew originates. Eber's descendants eventually included Terah, the father of Abraham. This progression underscores the intentionality of God's design, as he chose a specific family line to carry the promise of blessing and redemption to the nations. Abraham's calling, which begins in Genesis 12, is deeply rooted in the legacy of faith and obedience that Shem exemplified. When God called Abraham to leave his homeland and go to the land he would show him, he was building upon the foundation laid by Shem, a foundation of trust in God's faithfulness. The connection between Shem and Abraham is not merely genealogical, it is deeply spiritual. Shem's life was marked by his dedication to preserving the knowledge of the one true God in a world increasingly characterized by idolatry and spiritual compromise. This legacy of monotheism was carried forward by his descendants, creating a lineage through which God's covenantal promises could take root and flourish. Abraham's faith and obedience were not isolated qualities, but the fruit of a heritage that traced back to Shem's commitment to honoring God's name. In this way, Shem's influence extended far beyond his own time, shaping the character and destiny of the family through whom God's redemptive plan would unfold. Shem's connection to the messianic promise is one of the most significant aspects of his legacy. Through Abraham, Shem's line became the vehicle for the promise of a savior, a descendant who would bless all nations and restore humanity's relationship with God. This promise, first hinted at in the Garden of Eden and reiterated through Noah's covenant, took on a clearer form in God's covenant with Abraham. The promise that all peoples on earth will be blessed through you, Genesis 12:3, is a direct continuation of the hope carried forward by Shem's descendants. Through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and ultimately the tribe of Judah, this lineage led to Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. Shem's life, therefore, is intricately connected to the greatest act of salvation in human history. The covenantal promise carried forward by Shem's descendants also shaped the identity and mission of the Hebrew people. As the chosen nation, Israel was tasked with being a light to the Gentiles, reflecting God's holiness and proclaiming his name among the nations. This mission was deeply rooted in the legacy of Shem, who had been blessed by Noah as the spiritual leader among his brothers. The responsibility of preserving the knowledge of God and living according to his ways was passed down through Shem's line, ultimately becoming the central calling of Abraham and his descendants. The Mosaic covenant, which codified the laws and practices that defined Israel's relationship with God, can be seen as an extension of the foundational covenant established with Shem and his family. Shem's influence is also evident in the cultural and spiritual distinctiveness of his descendants. The Hebrews, as direct descendants of Shem, maintained their identity as a people set apart for God's purposes, even in the face of exile, persecution, and dispersion. This resilience can be traced back to the principles of faith and obedience that Shem embodied. His life served as a model for how to remain faithful to God's calling, even in the midst of a world that often rejected his authority. The preservation of this identity through generations of Shem's descendants ensured that the covenantal promise would remain central to their mission, and that the hope of redemption would not be lost. The spiritual legacy of Shem also resonates in the broader context of God's relationship with humanity. While Shem's descendants carried the specific promise of the Messiah, his role as the father of Semitic nations highlights the inclusive nature of God's redemptive plan. The blessing given to Shem by Noah, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem," emphasizes the centrality of worship and devotion to God, a theme that extends beyond any one family or nation. Through the lineage of Shem, God demonstrated his intention to work through specific individuals and groups to bring about a blessing that would ultimately encompass all peoples. This universality is seen most clearly in the life and ministry of Jesus, whose death and resurrection opened the way for all nations to be reconciled to God. Shem's legacy in the line of Abraham also serves as a reminder of the importance of stewardship in fulfilling God's purposes. The covenantal promise carried forward by Shem's descendants required faithfulness, not only in preserving their heritage, but also in living in a way that reflected God's character. This stewardship was not always easy. The history of Israel is filled with moments of failure and rebellion. Yet the enduring faithfulness of God ensured that the promise remained intact, even in the face of human weakness. Shem's life illustrates the balance between divine sovereignty and human responsibility, where God's plans are carried out through the willing participation of his people. The connection between Shem and Abraham challenges us to reflect on the ways in which our own lives are part of a larger narrative. Just as Shem's faithfulness laid the groundwork for Abraham's calling, our choices and actions can have a lasting impact on the generations that follow. Shem's life reminds us that even in moments of uncertainty or obscurity, our faithfulness to God matters. His legacy, carried forward through Abraham and the Hebrew people, demonstrates that God works through ordinary individuals to accomplish extraordinary purposes. In Shem's connection to Abraham, we see the fulfillment of God's promise to preserve and redeem humanity after the flood. His descendants carried forward the knowledge of God, ensuring that the hope of salvation would remain alive until its ultimate fulfillment in Christ. Shem's life, though often overlooked, is a testament to the enduring power of faith and the ways in which God's promises transcend time and circumstance. Through Shem, we are reminded that each life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, plays a vital role in the unfolding of God's plan. As the world began to rebuild after the flood, Shem emerged as a guiding force in preserving and spreading the worship of the one true God. In a landscape where humanity was tasked with starting anew, Shem's role as a spiritual leader became increasingly vital. While his brothers, Ham and Japheth, contributed to the repopulation and cultural expansion of the earth, Shem's influence was distinct in its spiritual focus. Noah's blessing, which proclaimed that Shem's descendants would be uniquely aligned with the God of creation, positioned him as a patriarch not only of nations, but also of faith. This spiritual legacy defined Shem's influence in the post-flood world and set the trajectory for generations to follow. Shem's leadership was rooted in his unwavering commitment to monotheism. Having witnessed the devastating consequences of humanity's corruption before the flood, Shem understood the importance of maintaining faith in God as the cornerstone of society. His teachings emphasized the centrality of God's covenant with Noah, a covenant that promised protection and blessing but also demanded obedience and reverence. Through his example, Shem instilled in his descendants a deep awareness of their responsibility to live in alignment with God's will. This commitment to monotheism stood in stark contrast to the idolatry that quickly began to spread among other branches of humanity, as people turned away from the Creator to worship the works of their own hands. The spread of idolatry in the generations following the flood presented a significant challenge to Shem's mission. As Noah's descendants multiplied and dispersed across the earth, many abandoned the worship of God in favor of false gods and idols. This shift was driven by humanity's tendency towards self-reliance and pride, as well as the influence of spiritual deception. Shem, however, remained steadfast in his efforts to preserve the knowledge of the one true God. He became a teacher and patriarch to his descendants, passing down the stories of creation, the flood, and God's covenant with Noah. These teachings served as a foundation for the spiritual identity of the Semitic peoples, who carried forward Shem's commitment to monotheism even as idolatry gained prominence elsewhere. Shem's influence was not limited to his immediate family. It extended to the broader cultural and spiritual development of the post-flood world. His guidance helped shape the moral and ethical frameworks of the nations that descended from him, including the Hebrews, Assyrians, and Arameans. Through his descendants, Shem established communities that were defined by their devotion to God and their commitment to living according to his principles. These communities became beacons of faith in a world increasingly dominated by pagan practices. The resilience of Shem's lineage in maintaining monotheism amidst widespread idolatry reflects the enduring impact of his leadership and the strength of his faith. One of the most significant aspects of Shem's influence was his ability to preserve faith through oral tradition and instruction. In an era before written scriptures, the knowledge of God and his works was passed down through storytelling and personal mentorship. Shem's role as a teacher ensured that the truths of God's character and his covenant were not forgotten, but were instead woven into the fabric of his descendants' lives. These teachings laid the groundwork for the eventual development of the Hebrew Scriptures, which would codify the knowledge of God and provide a lasting record of his dealings with humanity. By preserving these truths, Shem ensured that the worship of God would continue even in the face of cultural and spiritual opposition. The tension between monotheism and idolatry during Shem's time highlights the challenges of living faithfully in a world prone to spiritual compromise. As humanity expanded and diversified, the temptation to create gods in their own image became increasingly pervasive. Idolatry offered a sense of control and immediacy, appealing to human desires for tangible representations of divine power. Shem, however, understood that true worship required submission to the unseen but all-powerful Creator. His life and teachings served as a countercultural witness to the enduring truth of monotheism, challenging the prevailing trends of his time and inspiring future generations to hold fast to their faith. Shem's influence in the post-flood world also underscores the importance of leadership, rooted in humility and devotion to God. Unlike leaders who sought power or prestige, Shem's authority was derived from his spiritual integrity and his unwavering commitment to God's purposes. He did not seek to dominate or control, but rather to guide and inspire, modeling a life of faithfulness that others could emulate. This approach to leadership ensured that Shem's influence was not limited to his own lifetime, but continued to shape the spiritual identity of his descendants for generations. Through his example, Shem demonstrated that true leadership is about service and stewardship, not personal gain. The legacy of Shem's guidance and leadership is evident in the enduring faith of the Semitic peoples, particularly the Hebrews, who became the chosen nation through whom God would reveal his plan of redemption. The Hebrews' commitment to monotheism, even in the face of persecution and exile, can be traced back to Shem's influence in preserving the knowledge of God. This spiritual resilience became a defining characteristic of Shem's lineage, enabling them to withstand the pressures of a world increasingly dominated by idolatry and spiritual decay. Shem's role in spreading monotheism also carries a broader theological significance. By preserving and promoting the worship of the one true God, Shem's life and legacy point to the universality of God's plan for humanity. While Shem's descendants played a unique role in salvation history, their mission to uphold the truth of God's character and covenant serves as a model for all believers. Shem's influence reminds us that faith is not only a personal journey, but also a communal responsibility, one that requires dedication, courage, and a willingness to stand against the currents of a wayward world. In reflecting on Shem's influence, we are reminded of the enduring power of faith to shape not only individual lives, but also entire cultures and societies. Shem's commitment to monotheism amidst the spread of idolatry illustrates the importance of staying grounded in truth, even when it is unpopular or challenging. His life serves as a testament to the impact that one faithful individual can have in preserving and advancing God's purposes in the world. Through Shem, we see that faith is not just about survival. It is about flourishing, inspiring, and leaving a legacy that honors God and points others to Him. In the post-flood world, Shem's leadership laid the foundation for a spiritual movement that would endure through the ages. His guidance ensured that the worship of the one true God remained central to the identity of his descendants, even as the world around them turned to idols. Shem's life challenges us to consider our own role in preserving and spreading faith, reminding us that every act of obedience and every word of truth has the potential to impact generations to come. Through his unwavering commitment to God, Shem became a beacon of faith in a world that desperately needed light, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and guide believers to this day. The events surrounding the Tower of Babel marked a pivotal moment in the history of humanity, one that likely elicited a profound response from Shem as a man of faith and a spiritual leader in the post-flood world. The ambition to construct a tower that reached the heavens, a symbol of human pride and defiance against God, represented a direct rejection of the principles Shem had spent his life upholding. For Shem, who had lived through the flood and witnessed firsthand the consequences of humanity's rebellion, the construction of the Tower of Babel would have been a sobering reminder of how quickly people could turn away from God's commands, even after such a clear demonstration of his power and justice. The Tower of Babel was more than an architectural project. It was an expression of humanity's desire to assert its independence from God. The builders sought to make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered across the earth, directly opposing God's mandate to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. For Shem, this defiance would have been deeply troubling, as it reflected the same arrogance and disobedience that had characterized the pre-flood generation. The unity of the people at Babel, while impressive on the surface, was rooted in a shared rebellion rather than a collective pursuit of righteousness. Shem, with his commitment to preserving the worship of the one true God, would have seen this project as a dangerous and misguided attempt to place human ambition above divine authority. As God intervened to halt the construction of the tower by confusing the languages of the people, Shem likely observed the dispersion of nations with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. The scattering of humanity, though a judgment on their disobedience, also served to fulfill God's original command for them to spread across the earth. For Shem, this moment reinforced the importance of his role in maintaining and transmitting the faith. With nations now divided by language and geography, the challenge of preserving the knowledge of God became even greater. Shem understood that the worship of the one true God could not be left to chance. It required intentionality, teaching, and the establishment of a legacy that would transcend borders and cultures. The dispersion at Babel highlighted the fragility of humanity's connection to God in the face of pride and division. As the father of the Semitic nations, Shem played a crucial role in ensuring that the worship of God did not become lost amidst the chaos. His descendants, spread across various regions, carried with them the teachings and traditions that Shem had instilled. This commitment to preserving the faith amidst dispersion became a defining characteristic of Shem's legacy. Through his guidance, the knowledge of God remained central to the identity of his family, even as they settled in different lands and faced the influences of idolatry and cultural assimilation. Shem's reaction to the events at Babel would have been shaped by his deep understanding of God's character and purposes. Having witnessed both God's judgment in the flood and his mercy in the covenant with Noah, Shem would have recognized the dispersion as both a consequence of sin and an opportunity for renewal. The scattering of nations, while initially disruptive, ultimately served to spread humanity across the earth, fulfilling God's design for creation. Shem's role in this new phase of human history was to act as a custodian of faith, ensuring that the light of God's truth continued to shine in a world fractured by language and distance. The Tower of Babel also underscored the importance of humility and dependence on God, lessons that Shem would have sought to impart to his descendants. The failure of the tower was a stark reminder that human ambition, when divorced from submission to God, leads to confusion and destruction. For Shem, this event was a teaching moment, a chance to reinforce the necessity of living in alignment with God's will. His life and leadership became a counterpoint to the hubris displayed at Babel, offering an alternative vision of unity grounded in faith rather than rebellion. Shem's influence in the aftermath of Babel extended beyond his immediate family. As nations emerged and established their own identities, Shem's lineage remained a source of spiritual guidance and stability. His descendants, including Eber and later Abraham, carried forward the mission of preserving monotheism in a world increasingly dominated by idolatry. The dispersion of nations created new challenges for maintaining the faith, but it also opened new opportunities for Shem's legacy to reach diverse peoples and cultures. Through his descendants, Shem's influence became a unifying thread in a fragmented world, demonstrating that the worship of God transcends language, geography, and human divisions. The spiritual implications of the Tower of Babel resonate deeply with Shem's legacy. While the tower represented humanity's attempt to ascend to heaven through its own efforts, Shem's life pointed to a different path, one of humility, obedience, and trust in God's provision. The confusion of languages at Babel was a corrective measure, redirecting humanity's focus from self-exaltation to reliance on the Creator. Shem's commitment to preserving the knowledge of God ensured that this lesson was not lost but became a foundational principle for his descendants. In a world scattered and divided, Shem's leadership provided a sense of continuity and purpose, reminding humanity of its dependence on the God who created and sustains all things. The dispersion of nations also highlighted the universality of Shem's mission. As his descendants settled in different regions, they carried with them the truths of God's covenant, planting seeds of faith that would bear fruit in unexpected ways. While some branches of Shem's lineage, such as the Hebrews, maintained a direct and explicit relationship with God, others contributed to the broader cultural and spiritual development of the ancient world. This diversity within Shem's legacy reflects the complexity and richness of God's plan for humanity, where different peoples and nations play unique roles in the unfolding story of redemption. Shem's reaction to Babel and his role in its aftermath remind us of the importance of faithfulness in the face of adversity and change. The events at Babel were a turning point in human history, a moment of division that could have led to the loss of spiritual unity. Yet, through Shem's leadership and commitment, the worship of the one true God remained a central thread in the fabric of humanity's story. His life challenges us to consider how we respond to moments of disruption and division, urging us to remain steadfast in our faith and to seek unity through our shared dependence on God. In the end, Shem's influence in the post-Babel world illustrates the enduring power of faith to transcend human limitations. While the confusion of languages and the scattering of nations created new challenges, they also provided opportunities for the spread of God's truth to new lands and peoples. Through his guidance and example, Shem ensured that the worship of God would not be confined to a single place or group, but would continue to shape the identity and destiny of humanity. His response to Babel serves as a testament to the resilience of faith and the transformative impact of living in alignment with God's purposes. Shem's role as a patriarch extended far beyond his immediate family, influencing generations that would shape the spiritual and cultural identity of the ancient world. His longevity, a hallmark of the antediluvian and early post-flood generations, allowed him to serve as a living link between the world before the flood and the emerging nations that grew from his descendants. According to biblical genealogies, Shem lived for 600 years, spanning several pivotal eras in human history. This extraordinary lifespan enabled him to provide guidance, mentorship, and spiritual leadership to his descendants, ensuring that the faith and knowledge of God were preserved and transmitted across multiple generations. As a patriarch, Shem occupied a unique position of authority and respect within his family and among the broader community of his descendants. His relationship with his children and grandchildren was characterized by his unwavering commitment to the covenantal promise given to his father, Noah. Shem's role was not limited to providing material support or overseeing the expansion of his lineage. He was also a spiritual teacher who passed down the truths of God's character, his judgment during the flood, and his mercy in sparing humanity. These teachings became the foundation upon which his descendants built their understanding of God and their role in his plan. Among Shem's descendants were key figures such as Peleg and Eber, whose lives marked significant developments in human history. Peleg, whose name means division, was born during the time when the earth was divided, a likely reference to the events of the Tower of Babel and the dispersion of nations. This period of division presented challenges to maintaining a unified faith, but Shem's influence ensured that the worship of the one true God remained central to the identity of his family. Peleg's generation would have looked to Shem as a source of wisdom and continuity, drawing on his experiences and teachings to navigate the complexities of a fragmented world. Eber, another prominent descendant of Shem, is often regarded as the progenitor of the Hebrews. His name is associated with the term Hebrew, which came to define the identity of Abraham and his descendants. Eber's life and lineage were profoundly shaped by the legacy of Shem, who served as both a spiritual and cultural anchor for his family. Through Eber, the values and traditions established by Shem were carried forward, laying the groundwork for the covenantal relationship that God would later establish with Abraham. This continuity highlights Shem's enduring impact as a patriarch, whose teachings and example influenced not only his immediate descendants, but also the broader trajectory of salvation history. Shem's longevity allowed him to witness the growth and expansion of his family into nations, each with its unique identity and role in God's plan. His descendants included not only the Hebrews, but also the Assyrians, Arameans, and Elamites, among others. This diversity within Shem's lineage reflects the breadth of his influence as a patriarch, whose legacy transcended cultural and geographical boundaries. While each branch of his family developed its distinct character, they all carried the imprint of Shem's leadership and the spiritual foundation he had established. This unity amidst diversity underscores the central role of faith in Shem's life and his commitment to preserving the knowledge of God for future generations. As a spiritual leader, Shem's mentorship extended beyond teaching about God's covenant. He also modeled a life of humility, obedience, and service, demonstrating what it meant to live in alignment with God's will. His relationship with his descendants was rooted in mutual respect and a shared commitment to the divine mission of preserving and spreading the worship of the one true God. Shem's example inspired his family to prioritize faith and obedience, even in the face of challenges such as the spread of idolatry and the division of nations. His influence as a patriarch was not confined to his words, but was evident in the way he lived his life, serving as a beacon of faith and integrity. The challenges faced by Shem's descendants during his lifetime highlight the importance of his role as a unifying figure. The dispersion at Babel, coupled with the rapid expansion of human populations, created a context in which maintaining a shared spiritual identity was increasingly difficult. Shem's presence provided a stabilizing force for his family, ensuring that the truths of God's covenant were not diluted or forgotten. His longevity allowed him to serve as a bridge between generations, reinforcing the continuity of faith and the importance of adhering to God's commands. This role as a patriarchal anchor was vital in a world where the pressures of cultural and spiritual fragmentation threatened to erode the foundations of faith. Shem's life also served as a testimony to the enduring relevance of God's promises. As one of the few survivors of the flood, Shem embodied the faithfulness of God in preserving humanity and carrying forward his plan for redemption. His interactions with his descendants would have been marked by a deep awareness of this divine faithfulness, encouraging them to trust in God's provision and to live in a way that honored the covenant. Through Shem's guidance, his family came to understand that their lives were part of a larger narrative, one that began with creation, was preserved through the flood, and would ultimately lead to the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. The significance of Shem's role as a patriarch extends beyond his own family to the broader biblical narrative. His life illustrates the importance of generational faithfulness, where the actions and teachings of one generation have a profound impact on those that follow. Shem's commitment to preserving the knowledge of God ensured that his descendants remained rooted in their faith, even as they faced the challenges of a changing and often hostile world. This legacy of faithfulness serves as a reminder of the power of spiritual leadership to shape not only individual lives, but also the destiny of entire nations. Shem's relationship with his descendants also highlights the importance of mentorship and discipleship in maintaining and transmitting faith. By investing in the spiritual growth of his family, Shem ensured that the covenantal promises given to Noah were carried forward with integrity and purpose. His role as a patriarch was not about wielding authority, but about fostering a sense of responsibility and devotion among his descendants. Through his example, Shem demonstrated that true leadership is rooted in service, humility, and a commitment to God's will. In reflecting on Shem's role as a patriarch, we are reminded of the enduring impact of faith and leadership across generations. His life challenges us to consider how we can invest in the spiritual growth of those who come after us, ensuring that the truths of God's character and covenant remain central to their identity. Shem's longevity and influence illustrate the importance of living with a sense of purpose, recognizing that our actions and choices have the potential to shape the future in profound ways. Through his faithfulness and leadership, Shem left a legacy that continues to inspire and guide believers to this day. Shem's death marked the end of an extraordinary life, one that spanned centuries and left an indelible mark on the history of humanity and faith. The biblical narrative does not provide specific details about the circumstances of Shem's death, but the longevity attributed to him, 600 years, indicates that he lived through pivotal moments in human history, witnessing the growth and expansion of nations descended from his lineage. As one of the few survivors of the pre-flood world and a direct participant in God's plan to preserve humanity, Shem's passing would have been a profound moment for his family and descendants, who looked to him as a spiritual leader and a living testament to the covenant established with Noah. The spiritual significance of Shem's life is inextricably tied to his role as a faithful steward of God's covenant. From the time he emerged from the ark after the flood, Shem dedicated his life to preserving and spreading the worship of the one true God. His death symbolized the close of an era, as he had served as a vital link between the world before the flood and the generations that followed. For his descendants, Shem's life embodied the principles of faith, obedience, and resilience in the face of challenges. He had lived through the judgment of the flood, participated in the rebuilding of the earth, and guided his family through moments of spiritual and cultural transformation. His death was not simply the passing of a patriarch, but the culmination of a life deeply aligned with God's purposes. Shem's legacy as the father of nations and a keeper of the covenant is evident in the genealogies and historical narratives that trace their roots back to him. His descendants became the founders of some of the most influential nations in the ancient world, including the Hebrews, Arameans, Assyrians, and Elamites. Each of these nations carried forward aspects of Shem's spiritual heritage, though their paths diverged in significant ways. Among these, the Hebrew people emerged as the covenantal line through whom God would reveal his plan of redemption. This distinction highlights Shem's enduring impact, as his faithfulness laid the foundation for the unfolding of God's promises to humanity. The covenantal significance of Shem's life cannot be overstated. Noah's blessing, which declared, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem," positioned Shem as a spiritual leader whose descendants would carry forward the knowledge of God. This blessing was fulfilled most clearly through the Hebrew people, who became the recipients of God's covenant with Abraham and the bearers of his law through Moses. The spiritual continuity between Shem's life and the covenantal relationship established with Abraham underscores the centrality of Shem's role in the broader narrative of salvation history. His life serves as a bridge between the covenant with Noah and the messianic promise fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Shem's legacy is also reflected in the resilience of his descendants in maintaining their faith amidst the challenges of a world increasingly characterized by idolatry and spiritual compromise. The worship of the one true God, preserved and passed down through Shem's line, provided a countercultural witness to the nations around them. This commitment to monotheism, rooted in Shem's teachings and example, became a defining characteristic of the Hebrew people and a testament to the enduring impact of his leadership. Shem's role as a keeper of the covenant ensured that the knowledge of God remained central to his family's identity, even as they faced external pressures and internal struggles. The death of Shem would have been a moment of reflection for his descendants, who had witnessed his unwavering faith and leadership over the course of his long life. His passing marked the transition to a new generation of leaders who would carry forward the mission of preserving and spreading the worship of God. For those who came after him, Shem's life served as a model of faithfulness and perseverance, demonstrating the importance of aligning one's life with God's purposes. His death was not an end, but a continuation of the legacy he had established, as his descendants carried forward the covenantal promise and the hope of redemption. Shem's influence extended beyond his immediate family to the broader spiritual and cultural development of the ancient world. His teachings and example shaped the moral and ethical frameworks of the nations that descended from him, providing a foundation for the development of laws, traditions, and religious practices. Through his guidance, Shem ensured that the principles of justice, mercy, and reverence for God were embedded in the fabric of his descendants' lives. This legacy of faith and morality became a cornerstone of the civilizations that emerged from Shem's lineage, influencing the course of history in profound ways. The spiritual significance of Shem's life is also evident in the broader theological themes that his story represents. As a survivor of the flood and a recipient of God's covenantal blessing, Shem's life exemplifies the principles of grace, redemption, and divine faithfulness. His role as a patriarch and spiritual leader highlights the importance of generational faithfulness, where the actions and teachings of one generation shape the destiny of those that follow. Through his life, Shem demonstrated that faith is not only a personal journey, but also a communal responsibility, requiring dedication and intentionality to preserve and transmit the knowledge of God. In reflecting on Shem's death and legacy, we are reminded of the enduring impact of a life lived in alignment with God's purposes. This story challenges us to consider how our own lives contribute to the broader narrative of faith and redemption, encouraging invest in the spiritual growth of future generations. Shem's legacy as a father of nations and a keeper of the covenant illustrates the profound influence that one individual can have when they dedicate themselves to God's mission. His life serves as a testament to the power of faith to shape not only individual lives, but also the course of human history. Shem's death, though marking the end of his earthly journey, was the culmination of a life that had been deeply intertwined with God's plan for humanity. His descendants carried forward the principles and promises that defined his life, ensuring that the worship of God remained central to their identity and mission. Through Shem, the covenantal blessings given to Noah were preserved and expanded, paving the way for the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. His legacy continues to inspire and challenge believers to live with purpose, faith, and a commitment to preserving the truths of God's word for generations to come. Shem's life is a profound testimony to the transformative power of faith, the rewards of obedience, and the weight of stewardship in carrying out God's purposes. From the moment he stepped onto the ark to the time of his passing centuries later, Shem exemplified unwavering trust in God, even when faced with challenges that tested the limits of human understanding. His life reminds us that faith is not just about believing in God's promises, but actively living in alignment with them. Shem's role in preserving the knowledge of the one true God in a world rife with idolatry demonstrates the importance of staying grounded in truth, even when surrounded by cultural pressures to compromise. Shem's obedience shines through every chapter of his story, particularly in his participation in the construction of the ark and his stewardship of the covenant after the flood. His actions were not driven by convenience or personal ambition, but by a deep commitment to God's commands. This obedience laid the foundation for a legacy that would influence generations, from his immediate descendants to the eventual coming of the Messiah. For modern audiences, Shem's life serves as a reminder that obedience to God often requires sacrifice and perseverance, but the rewards, both spiritual and eternal, are immeasurable. One of the most striking aspects of Shem's story is his stewardship of God's covenant. Unlike his brother Ham, whose actions invited judgment, Shem understood the significance of his calling and embraced his role as a spiritual leader. This stewardship involved not only preserving the worship of God, but also passing on the principles of faith and righteousness to his descendants. In a world increasingly divided and fragmented, Shem's dedication to his responsibilities ensured that the covenantal promises remained central to his family's identity. His life teaches us that stewardship is not just about managing resources, it is about faithfully carrying out the mission God has entrusted to us. Shem's life also speaks to modern challenges in maintaining spiritual integrity. Just as Shem faced the spread of idolatry and rebellion in his time, believers today encounter cultural pressures that threaten to dilute their faith. The allure of materialism, the distractions of technology, and the relativism of modern society often pull us away from the foundational truths of Scripture. Shem's example challenges us to resist these influences and to remain steadfast in our commitment to God. His life reminds us that spiritual integrity requires intentionality, discipline, and a willingness to stand firm in the face of opposition. The parallels between Shem's time and today are striking. Like Shem, we live in a world where divisions abound, where humanity often prioritizes its own ambitions over obedience to God. Yet, Shem's life offers hope that faithfulness can endure even in the most challenging circumstances. By looking to his example, we are reminded of the importance of living with purpose, stewarding our faith, and passing on the knowledge of God to future generations. Shem's story is a call to embrace our roles as spiritual leaders in our families, communities, and beyond, ensuring that the light of God's truth continues to shine in a darkened world. Shem's life is a testament to God's faithfulness and the extraordinary impact of living in alignment with his purposes. From his role in the ark to his influence as a patriarch, Shem's legacy is one of faith, obedience, and resilience. His story illustrates the beauty of God's redemptive plan, where even in the midst of judgment, there is always hope and restoration. As the father of nations and a keeper of the covenant, Shem's life laid the groundwork for the lineage of Abraham and ultimately the coming of Jesus Christ. His example challenges us to reflect on how our own lives can contribute to God's plan and inspire future generations to remain faithful. As we consider Shem's role in God's redemptive story, let us remember that his life is part of a much larger narrative, a narrative that invites us to participate in God's work of restoration and renewal. The principles Shem lived by, faith, obedience, and stewardship, are just as relevant today as they were in his time. His story encourages us to stay rooted in God's promises, even when the world around us seems uncertain or chaotic. Just as Shem persevered through the challenges of his time, we too are called to live faithfully, trusting in the God who is always working for our good. Before we close, let's take a moment to pray together. Wherever you are, I invite you to repeat this prayer after me. Heavenly Father, thank you for the life and legacy of Shem, a man who walked faithfully with you. Help me to learn from his example, to trust in your promises, and to live a life of obedience and faith. Teach me to steward the gifts and responsibilities you have entrusted to me, and to pass on the knowledge of your truth to the next generation. Lord, strengthen my faith and guide my steps so that I may honor you in all that I do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. If this story of Shem has inspired you, I encourage you to dive deeper into the Bible and explore more stories of faith and redemption. The lives of people like Abraham, Moses, and David are filled with lessons that can transform your perspective and deepen your relationship with God. Let these stories remind you that God's plan for humanity is one of hope, restoration, and eternal purpose. Finally, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, please take a moment to like this video, comment below with your thoughts or questions, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring these biblical stories to life and share them with people around the world. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's continue to learn and grow in faith as we explore the timeless truths of God's Word. Thank you for joining us today. May God bless you and guide you as you walk in faith. Until next time, stay strong in your journey, and remember, your story, like Shem's, is part of God's greater plan.